Hello, and welcome to Uncle Milo's Story Corner. I'm Uncle Milo, and this next story is called The Ghost Train of the Poughkeepsie Bridge. This one I wrote myself. The Ghost Train of the Poughkeepsie Bridge by Milo Tsukroff. Come on, George urged me. This way. Keep low and go over the rail right here. This isn't easy, I complained. Yeah, but I'm the one who knows how to sneak onto the walkway. If anyone could do it, you can do it, George, I whispered. We tumbled onto the concrete deck and crept forward. George stood up. The cameras and the detectors are back there. We're safe now. I straightened up. We were standing in the middle of the walkway over the Hudson. It was approaching midnight. The moon was up, dodging in and out of thin clouds. Welcome to the Poughkeepsie Highland Railroad Bridge, George said grandly, throwing his arms wide and turning completely around in the semi-darkness. The concrete deck glowed an eerie bone white in the misty light. Fog rose from the river in wisps like wraiths rising from a graveyard. The river banks hung large, dark, and mysterious in the night. Yuck, I exclaimed. What's that smell? George answered sharply. That's just the Hudson River. It's more than that, I muttered. There was a sharp scent of muddy water mixed with the scent of concrete cooling after a hot day, dead fish, and distant pizza. A horn blasted sharply. I jerked and grabbed at George. What's that? I asked nervously. Calm down, Peter, George said scornfully. That's just a passenger train down at the station. He pointed to the Poughkeepsie train station, a blaze of lights far below us. Oh, yeah, I knew that, I laughed weakly. My heart pounded in my ears. If you're going to be scared of anything, you should be scared of the widow's curse, George said calmly. I wanted to scream. I hissed at him. What curse? Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? This isn't the time to hear about that sort of thing. Oh, this is the perfect time. It takes a bit of explanation, though. George carefully walked straight down the middle of the walkway, arms spread out straight sideways. You can't do that during the day, he said with a grin that looked fiendish in the moonlight. Too many people. The curse! Tell me about the curse, I hissed. George could infuriate me at times. He kept on walking and explained. Okay, here goes. This bridge was once part of a great railroad. It was a mighty double ribbon of steel connecting Danbury, Connecticut in the east to New York State and the Pennsylvania coal mines to the west. My mind wandered for a moment. George was telling me one of his crazy railroad stories. It was dark and eerie under the pale light of the moon. The walkway seemed to have lengthened to infinity. There was no end to it, no matter how far we walked. We must have walked 5 miles already. No, 10. So when the widow sued the railroad, they refused to pay for the cow, George was saying. What cow? I asked. George paused, then asked, Are you listening? Not really, I admitted. I'm getting used to the dark. It's nice out here. Yeah, until you remember the widow's curse, George said sharply. You were explaining? Anyways, George continued, when the railroad refused to pay for the cow, she put a curse on the railroad. Especially this section, between Highland and Poughkeepsie. Some say that's the reason this bridge burned every dozen years. Come on, I laughed nervously. You've got to be kidding. No, it really happened, George insisted. $12 was the widow's fee for the cow that got killed. She cursed the railroad so that something bad happens every 12 years. 12 years after the railroad refused to pay the widow, a locomotive threw a tire and got stuck right in the middle of the bridge. Shut the whole line down for days. A tire, I said sarcastically. Right. Now I know you're making this up. Locomotives don't have tires. They're all made out of metal. You're ignorant when it comes to trains. That's your problem. Of course they have tires. They have big metal tires like hoops that fit onto the big driving wheels. George went on. The train braked so hard coming down the grade through Highland that the tire overheated and it came off on the bridge. They had to heat it back up and put it back on right there on the bridge. It took them a few days, and it cost the railroad a whole lot of money and lost revenue. Oh, that's it, I said. So that was the widow's curse that did it. Oh, yes, George agreed. It cost them the price of a cow, all right, times 1,000. I whistled. So that was the end of the curse, right? I can hope, right? You wish, George shot back. The curse just kept on going. Fires, derailments, locomotives appearing out of nowhere to frighten rail crews, then just vanishing. He said ominously, and it hasn't ended yet. A fire in 1962. They barely saved the bridge that time. The 1974 fire that put the bridge right out of business. Nobody knows how those fires started. Another fire in 1986, maybe set by fireworks. Then in 1998, a man fell off the bridge. It cost the walkway its insurance. And now it's 12 years after that. I suddenly shivered. This was the 12th year after. I began to sweat. The night began to look dark and foreboding. I had a sour taste in my mouth. Don't worry about it, George said. He stopped to look over the rail at the river 212 feet below. I kept on walking toward the Highland side. A fog must have risen. A bank of fog now lay high over the far side of the river, clear in the moonlight. The bridge deck disappeared into it, and I couldn't see the trees on the Highland side. A clock in Poughkeepsie began to ring out the hour. It was easy to hear in the stillness of the night. 1, 2, 3. I counted up to 12. Midnight. Midnight? Widow's curse, I said out loud. What am I doing on this bridge at midnight? I must be crazy. I thought I heard something away off on the highland side. It was long and low and faint. Was that a cow? Or was it some machine hooting in the distance? What's wrong with me? I laughed. Widow's curse. Now I'm thinking about cows. I heard it again. That's a train whistle, I said to myself. That's not a diesel. It's a steam whistle. You can hear how wet it is. I looked intensely at the fog bank. A faint pinprick of light was glowing in the middle. Down where the walkway went into the fog, it got slowly larger and brighter. Something was approaching. I stopped and stared. Suddenly, the steam whistle shattered the night. Something massive burst out of the fog and headed right down the middle of the walkway toward me. It was black and giant, surrounded by white steam like ghostly flames streaming out all around it, with a single ghostly white light in the middle. The whistle sounded again, so loud that my eardrums nearly burst. A wave of total terror washed over me, the kind that picks your feet up and gives them wings. I ran. I dashed down the bridge like lightning. The ghostly mass kept getting closer and closer. If only I could make the center of the bridge. I could dodge to one side, and that thing, the ghost of a train or whatever it was, could go by me. My legs began to burn. Closer, closer it came. I could hear every noise a steam engine makes, the swish, swish of the McCoy valves, the pistons chug-chugging, squealing of metal against metal. My side began to hurt. It felt like a jabbing knife. I couldn't get enough breath. I forced my legs to keep going. The monster racing out of the fog was closing in on me. How long is this bridge, I wondered? I must have run a dozen Poughkeepsie walkways by now. I couldn't go on. I knew I was beat. Spots floated in front of my eyes. My legs were in agony, and a fire burned in both my sides. I began to cry, regretting every bad deed I had ever done. I had no breath for shouting, but through my ragged gasps I whispered, "It's not fair. I'm too young to die." The night grew gray about me, and I tumbled to the concrete. I couldn't go on. I was finished. At that point, I noticed two things. I was in the middle of the bridge. There was no mistaking the outline of that particular brass plaque and the row of benches. The other thing was the most horrifying sight I have ever seen. A coal-black locomotive was moving toward me, throwing out clouds of white steam behind it. I saw the round front and the headlight quite clearly. It had a tiny cowcatcher in front. It was aimed right at me. The train seemed to be slowing as it rolled toward me, pulling a mass of mist along with it. The chugging and scraping sounds were slower now, much slower. Then there was a terrible sound, the worst I've ever heard, a sort of clanging and banging and screeching. I threw my hands over my head. I couldn't move, lying exhausted on the solid concrete deck. The train rolled slowly toward me. The noise grew louder and louder until the whole valley rang with a roar of metal scraping on metal, and the bridge shuddered beneath me. I screamed! I screamed again! There was no noise but my own noise. A huge behemoth of a black locomotive stood only a few yards from me, hissing in the moonlight. Clouds of steam billowed up around it and hid everything behind it. Its large headlight glowed a ghostly gray radiance. I distinctly smelled sulphurous coal smoke and hot metal. The dark figure of a trainman appeared through the steam. It climbed down, kneeled in the cowcatcher, and peered toward me. My heart froze in terror as I saw the grinning face of a skull under the railway hat. "Larry, what you doing up there?" a voice called from behind the steam. "Thought I heard something," the ghostly skeleton growled. It picked itself up and moved back behind the steam. Voices mumbled and cursed. Something clanged like a wrench hitting locomotive parts. Voices murmured behind the hissing clouds of steam. Then someone said clearly, "Bling, blang it! The tires come clean off!" There was a burst of swearing. My head swam from exhaustion. Then the wind shifted and blew the steam toward me. It rolled around me in a fog, and I couldn't see anything. I must have passed out for a moment. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the deck of the bridge. My lungs burned, my sides hurt, and my legs ached. A fog bank draped across the far end of the bridge, right in the moonlight. George walked up. "What are you doing there?" he asked curiously. I looked around. There was this train I started. Then I stopped. There wasn't anything in sight. I thought I heard something, way off on the Poughkeepsie side. It was long and low and faint. "Listen," George said. "Was that a cow mooing?" P.S. This is just a piece of fiction. It actually isn't possible to get onto the walkway without being detected and arrested. And that's the end of that story. The next story will be Cooperstown Caboose, Final Jump, Hijacked.